take their seats.
Ще раз доброго ранку. Перепрошую за невеличку затримку. У нас поки що затримується ще.
So, I believe that we can start now. Thank you for being with us today. I'm Tatiana Kovryga, and I am a BRDO Center representative, and we in March last year we presented results of the rating, and there were emotional discussions, and we thank you for this position, these views, that you shared your opinions and even criticized us. That shows that you are ready to constructive dialogue, and we will present in autumn the new rating, and we will inform you on this. And our rating is the rating of capacity for dialogue. And BRDO, supported by the European Union, we started a campaign of public dialogue that will be a channel of communication that is active between power and business. And we, as experts, we analyzed the regulatory field in 8 markets, and we carried out public consultations with business, power, and regulators. What I want to say is that the establishment of dialogue and constructive dialogue is possible, and this dialogue can be a driver to changes. And we have changes many sectors, in IT sector, telecom, due to constructive dialogue between power and business. They adopted many changes recently. And there was the introduction of the new market of mobile payments, and I won't go into detail. If you are interested, we are always happy to communicate with you. Please join us through the site and attend our events. We will have 30 events to establish public dialogue about the rating we are going to present. While developing this rating, we hope that our recommendations will be heard and the practice that is established. Unfortunately, regulatory decisions are being adopted, they are not discussed properly. They are not communicated with the business, and they should be communicated, they should be explained, there should be communication, discussion, and this discussion should not be a declaration. It should be implemented properly, and both business and power will win from this. Now I would like to introduce our speakers, and they will tell about the attitude of business and the attitude of public. Today we have regional development Representative Miroshnychenko, and also Natalia Oksha, Deputy Director of Department of Information Communication, and Ms. Hlazkova and Yevhen Shkolnyi. Also, we'll have the representative Svetlana Rashkivska. No, we don't have her. So we hope that Svetlana will join us later. And Igor Lavrynenko, leading analyst at the Better Regulation Delivery Office. And I give the floor to Igor now. So efficient regulation is not possible without proper communication about the plans of the state and how the state implements these plans and what intentions are behind these legal acts. And based on regulatory activity law, we carried out rating of executive bodies of power, how they implement effective legislation. We have 4 blocks. First question, whether the power can be forecast, whether they can inform society properly beforehand. Second question, whether the parliament is able to take into account the proposals of stakeholders and civil society politicians in the course of development of regulatory acts. And the third is whether the power is able to inform society about regulatory activity. And the last question, the most difficult and the most problematic now, is whether the power is able to assess efficiency of its own decisions. So what we have, first about the planning. The majority of executive power bodies at central level, they are able to meet requirements, they are able to plan their regulatory activity and inform society on this. And the Ministry of Regional Development is the leader here. But some bodies, they forget about it, or they don't believe that it is necessary to inform the society. This is Anti-Monopoly Committee that does not inform about their plans. So also there are several drawbacks in this. A lot of officials and ministries, they have formal attitude towards this. They present their plans as PDF files or a photo in the format that is not easy to use, and it is difficult to work with such documents. And also, not all bodies of power inform society about changes to these plans. So in December, for example, they adopted the plans of regulatory activity for a year. Then they introduced changes to the plan, and they adopted some regulatory act that they didn't have in the plan, for example, on the 15th of April, and on the 14th of April, they introduced changes. So the society is not informed about the activity of this body properly. And based on rating, maybe with regulatory services and the ministries, we will present analytical materials, how in the best way the bodies of power should inform the society and should inform the business about their plans. Because if business doesn't know beforehand about the plans, they won't be able to get prepared. They won't be able to send their proposals and correct their business plans, and this is really important. The second block, and this is the most important one, the meeting of requirements of legislation in the development of these acts. So they should present the draft acts, and they should present information about proposals, and they should provide analytical materials about these draft regulatory acts. And nearly all the ministries formally meet these requirements of the law, and the Ministry of Regional Development are the leaders here. But part of the ministries, they do not want or they cannot do this. And one of the examples is the Ministry of Sports. What arguments they have? They do not believe that their regulatory acts are regulatory ones. So maybe this is a question to lawyers. Maybe this is the problem of lawyers. Not all officials are whether these acts are regulatory or not regulatory, how to assess these acts. If you are not sure about the status, you can ask regulatory service whether this is a regulatory act or not. But the practice shows that during last year, this rating is based on data of 2016. The number of regulatory acts that were adopted by bodies of power decreased by half. So 3,000 in the previous year and 1,500 in 2016. So this is the communication between the bodies of power and the regulatory service. The bodies of power goes to the regulatory service and they say you didn't publish it, so start it anew. And they said, for example, that their site fell or they had some other problems, and we want to present recommendations how to do it in the best way, how to publish it and how to communicate it and discuss it with the society. And the Ministry of Infrastructure provides the opportunity to assess the draft documents online. So they do not just do it through email, but they do it on the site. This assessment is done on the site, and the body of power provides the assessment of the proposals of the society. And one of the main problems that remains unsolved, you can send your proposal to the body of power, and they do not respond whether your proposals are taken into account, whether they are important. So this is one-way dialogue. You express your opinion, but you do not know how this thought was assessed, so they do not respond. And the next question, and the group of normative requirements, this is the information to society about regulatory activity. They publish reports, but the quality of reports is different. Some bodies provide annually, and we got, for example, 25 orders, and that is all. And some report monthly, and these are in-depth reports. So what regulatory acts they adopted, what regulatory acts they are developing, what regulatory acts they plan to develop. And if the ministry provides this information monthly or quarterly, this provides opportunity to business and society to better understand the plans of ministry, not on an annual basis, but online regularly, and to get to adapt to these plans and react on them. And other ministries, the Ministry of Justice, if they follow the lead of the leaders of the rating, this will be good not only for officials, not only for the ministry, but also for the society, not to face the situation. If you're business, you can understand this. You go to your work, and you understand that starting 1st January all the legislation changed, and you had New Year Eve for this change, for the adaptation to the change. So And also one more important aspect that is for business, and this is informing the society about the efficiency of regulatory acts. Now the majority of the ministries, they do it formally. They publish information, and we analyzed the order 25. This is a good order, so it can continue. So this information is useless. This is just statistics, and we believe that bodies of power are capable to carry out real analysis of efficiency and resultativeness, not only of draft laws they do now, but also effective regulatory acts to understand whether this act is needed after 5 years of its adoption, or whether some changes or should be introduced to it. And if we do this job formally, there will be some result, because our practice shows that a lot of things are formal, some regulatory acts that are used now. So, for example, the law was cancelled, but the act is not cancelled, or till now some acts continue, for example, those who that were adopted in the 1990s or even in the Soviet Union, and there is no reference to the laws. So the body of power could not adopt it, but it was adopted, and it is in effect, and no one assesses the legality or efficiency of this act. And in my opinion, if next year the ministries will do this inventory of their own acts and assess them concerning their legality, and cancel those that are not efficient or legal, that will be good for the bodies of power. They will understand what acts are not needed, and this will be good for business, and business will get rid of this excessive acts, and this will be a big fight against corruption, because the practice shows that civil servants use these gaps in legislation in order to demand something from business, some illegal payments. Thank you. Thank you for your attention. I would like to show the leaders. So the leader is the Ministry of Regional Policy, and a lot of problems in the row of the ministry, starting the Ministry of Youth and Sports and ending with the Ministry of Justice. And our recommendations, we will provide it on our site, and we will send it to the bodies of power in order that they understood and be able to look at their regulatory activity anew, and to change something in order to improve cooperation and interaction with the bodies of power, with civil society, with business, in order to prepare new regulatory acts and to assess those acts that are in effect. Thank you.
Thank you to you, Igor, and I would like to look at leaders' rating again on our slides. I would like to give the floor to Mr. Maxim. How has you managed to achieve such results, to communicate both with businesses and public, general public? Good afternoon. Thank you for your high assessment of our work. Formally doesn't mean bad. We are talking about this evaluation today. This is formal implementation of those requirements which are set. And if officials use bona fide approach, this formal implementation is also a good thing, but let's discuss today not implementation, but some things which can improve these relations. When formal things are in place, we still want some improvements. This is our obligation to have dialogue with public, and a matter of regulatory matters, they are assessed by our legal department, whether these regulatory acts are in our competence, and post them on website, and this department controls implementation of legislation, compliance with legislation by our ministry, and we practice communication with our stakeholders. We work with the Department of Housing and Utilities and professional associations and all other stakeholders who are interested in this area, in this field. We understand that multiple reminders of our regulatory service as the consequence of multiple cancellation or not adoption of acts, and even the Cabinet of Ministers regulatory act can be cancelled via a court. This is the requirement of legislation as concerns communication. We work very well with the Office of Regulation. There was a proposal on market analysis, market review to find out weaknesses and bottlenecks, because there are several fields, and if every ministry is responsible for some areas vested to these ministers. So, for example, connection to electricity networks, land plots, issue when policy was made by the ministry in this field, it was able to regulate it, and when the cadastre now is also has some responsibility. We are thinking of amalgamation, and businesses are also influenced negatively. I'd like to say that first of all, we should comply with legislative requirements and seek for the dialogue. There are many different opinions, attitudes, for example, to share participation, to self-government development, when towns do not want to forget about budgeting. Some other stakeholders think that there are corruption risks when budgeting invested in local self-governments. I'd like to thank everyone who helps us, Office of BRDO, our public council, and all other stakeholders. That's all. Mr. Maxim, thank you. I'd like to wish you to keep to so high quality of results in future. We have been working with many ministries on review of the markets, and Ministry of Regional Development is a driver in market review. They have reviewed more than 50 markets. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. I'd like to hear the comments of Ukrainian Entrepreneurs Association. Union of Ukrainian Entrepreneurs, whether the approach is formal or it is constructive. What do you think? Thank you. Good afternoon. I would like to thank Office of Efficient Regulation for their activities. The activities are really important. I will not praise them, but Ukrainian authorities declare their openness to dialogue with business, but this is not dialogue. Sometimes it is just unilateral conversations. Sometimes this looks like documents which are just asked to be commented by businesses. Well, maybe this is not the most efficient approach, but we agreed to provide our comments. We are open for dialogue because the Union of Ukrainian Entrepreneurs unite more than 500 companies facing the problems which our authorities also address when businesses are telling that something should be changed. People believe them, and unfortunately at local level there are many problems, but this is another story where the local authorities are open to dialogue with businesses as concerns national, central authorities. We try to visit meetings at the ministries and agencies. I can provide both positive and negative examples of communication with authorities. You know that when we are told that there is a problem of the draft law on national security in IT field, and as far as we know, law enforcement bodies will be able to close any websites without court resolutions, but this concerns all of us, purchasers, partners, sellers, everyone. We as entrepreneurs, conscious entrepreneurs, taxpayers who paid almost 15 billions of taxes, we are telling that we are interested in national security at the highest level, but let's look at this procedure where the businesses could be closed this way. We are on the front line more often than authorities. We are flagmans, and there is a vivid example in our cooperation with the Ministry of Infrastructure on the draft law on post office communications. We couldn't understand what was happening to this draft law, and the Ministry of Infrastructure representatives were not present, and we stopped this anti-market draft law, started the work from scratch. The ministry established a work group, and our representatives were there. We met last time in January, or maybe in February, and we do not know what is happening now to this draft law. We are telling that we are ready, let's talk. This is a dialogue which is missing. Declarations are available, but final results are lacking. The recent example is cyber attack, which touched almost everyone. We were the first who called on the national authorities to consider this circumstances because some businesses were unable to pay taxes because they are victims of this attack. And then we found that our tax code does not provide for consideration of force majeure. So this is very good that the draft law has been adopted. The businessmen were heard. Force majeure when businesses can't get their reports and file them in timely. There is the only way, no alternative for Ukraine. We should communicate businesses and authorities. Our cooperation should be close, and I'm optimistic. I hope that today's meeting and the ratings of efficient regulation office will encourage us to cooperate more. Maybe the thesis is unpopular, but legislative initiative for the sake of business which will be investing, then business will advocate for the changes in the best way. And then we will achieve important economic changes in the country. Thank you. Maybe there is some representatives of the Ministry of Infrastructure among the audience. Do you have any comments? You are welcome. Alexei Masaka, NGO, Marine Control of Ukraine. You said Ministry of Infrastructure. We are just working with this executive authorities, and I like to say that we are now conducting public expert assessment of this ministry, and minister, according to the legislation, should issue an order within 5 days and to establish a work group. But no response to our request followed. So the expert assessment demonstrated that often those draft laws which are adopted, they are acts of individual action and they are not regulatory, and ministry even do not demonstrate them. But there is a regulation connected to that every ministry should keep records of all orders signed by ministers and deputy ministers. Businesses and general public should see all orders signed. Maybe these orders are confidential. We have many questions to this confidentiality or classified mark. We should have the opportunity to see these orders issued by Minister of Infrastructure. Talking about this ministry, it is absolutely closed from public. Public councils often are not positive, but a kind of block. They just block direct work with authorities. This public council is a stopper of dialogue. We have been creating joint groups, joint teams with law enforcement bodies, and if one party is not interested, then the work will not go forward. There is such an initiative. State Secretary's Institute, which was established, it helped us to build some dialogue, but this is only society which can take some powers of central authorities and build this dialogue. The authorities are not interested. They will be backpedaling anyway. Well, I think we will continue. I would like to comment on the Ministry of Infrastructure. We do not have their representatives here in the room, but we will communicate them this information because in the previous rating, Ministry of Infrastructure was on the top, and they communicate easily not only with businesses but also with NGOs, and I think that we should knock maybe on the other door but in the same ministry, and I'm sure it is possible to find common language with them. We are NGO, we are independent think tank, and sometimes we also tell them negative things, but this ministry was fast communicating with us and maintain dialogue. I'd like to ask Ms. Natalia to comment the rating and the potential. More than 50%, which is demonstrated by other ministries and agencies. This is the potential which unlocking we are waiting. Mostly interested are businesses. How can we unlock it? And what should be our steps? What is your opinion? Good morning. I'd like to thank the Office of Efficient Regulation for their research. The government has already been making steps to build this cooperation and to inform in particular about the draft regulatory acts. There is a step as building a unified platform, single voice. We communicate with NGOs to get feedback on the actions and draft regulatory acts of the ministries and agencies, and explanatory materials are prepared about such draft decisions. Today, Igor has already told about multiple regulatory acts available, and there is a task of authorities to analyze all acts, and we have been performing activities along with the Office of Efficient Regulation, and several meetings at the government were held to cancel obsolete regulatory acts, and there is a law on access to public information in force in Ukraine, and to follow this law we should mandatorily give access to regulatory acts. More than 24,000 regional and national acts were publicized, but we are not limiting our activities to draft regulatory acts. We need public consultations, public discussions, public debates, and I'd like to say that we analyze whether public authorities consult on this, on those matters monthly. 400 to 450 public consultations are held at the level of ministries, central governmental authorities, and regional authorities. They are about 100 authorities, governmental authorities in total. The Ministry of Infrastructure has been mentioned as the ministry which made an important step to provide online commenting of draft regulatory acts. There is a governmental website, Society and Power, where other ministries and agencies place their draft acts, and you can comment there and see what comments have already been filed, submitted, and you can also comment on those comments. And I'd like to remind you that the final stage of development of the draft law is on the way. The law on public consultations, it will concern not only regulatory acts, but rather all acts, all draft acts being developed by the executive authorities. I think that many things from this draft law could be borrowed just for discussions on regulatory acts, and I'd like to emphasize that main innovations which we want to introduce by this draft law are discussions should be performed at the stage of final draft. We think that it should start earlier. We should start with discussion whether we need such draft act in general. If in the law on regulatory activities this law goes about regulatory acts, but we are in the draft law there is a part saying that in some cases public discussions should be conducted where all stakeholders can deliver their arguments, and you know that since 2004 the regulation the resolution is in force on procedure of public consultations. Such consultations are held, and also there are practices of reports on public consultations held. As it was already mentioned by Ms. Irina, that businesses do not know whether their comments have been incorporated, and if they have not, the arguments, the reasons should be provided in such reports. I want to recommend that the documents which they develop, they should be understandable, and they should be accompanied by explanatory notes. As concerns regulatory acts, analysis of regulatory impact should be written in such language that general public members can understand why this act is needed and what are expected results, who will be responsible for its implementation, and how it will be implemented. As concerns results of the rating, I completely support the proposals that the structure of rubrics of regulatory activities should be improved, and these sections they should be on the home page, but not in somewhere in deep. Because when we can't find these sections of public consultations and regulatory acts, this hinder public access. I also would like to add about the rating and outsiders. We should consider also that the outsiders maybe just develop not so many regulatory acts. Ministry of Regional Development maybe by percentage rate generate many regulatory acts. This should be considered. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalia. Thank you for the support of the initiative. Maybe we will discuss it further, and if our colleagues have proposals to include changes after this event, we will be ready to share contacts, and we invite you to actively participate. Yes, I have a comment to Natalia's speech. She said that there is a need to discuss the idea, not the act as it is. So today, you all know what is going on in the sphere of reforms of the state service, and the first is state secretary, and the second issue is the shift to the analysis and forming of the policy. The approach that exists in European countries, green and white books. First, they share the ideas, and then they discuss the mechanisms, and in essence, the act, it shouldn't be discussed. All the ideas should be put on green and white books, and the government and the ministries, they should have consultations to discuss problems, and we try now to get accustomed to some approach. We should, and I believe this will be done, and it will be easier to create ratings, and we should analyze the problems. The consultations should be held. We all should know what we have, and then we put the idea into the legislative act. What I wanted to say that we move in this direction, we will improve, and we expect that there will be changes to the Cabinet of Ministers processes, so there will be consultations and discussions of the problems, and about what Natalia said about understanding. So there will be green and white books, but people should understand how policy is made, so the mission of the ministry and the tasks of the ministry. So a person may enter the site and understand why this ministry acts like this or like that. So when people try to, so in Kiev we cannot influence at the local level, at some bodies of power. So people come to Kiev and ask, why do you exist? What are your responsibilities? So people should understand what are the goals, what is the mission of the central bodies of power, and it should be properly informed to the public what is this goal and this mission. So there is a need to discuss these problematic issues at the preliminary stages. And using this opportunity, I would like to say that we have 14 committees, and we are ready to join discussions at preliminary stages, and we hope that this will be a real dialogue. So using this opportunity, I would like to say that the office started its work. We are a leading office in this area, and we work according to European practices, and we create this research, and we analyze the activity, and the ministry joined us in our activities in several markets, and in some markets we started the work on forming the white books that will be made public in the nearest future, and you can find this information on the site. These books are published. There is an online consultations. You can join the process. You can provide your own comments and recommendations. This is at the level of ideas before some decisions be made. So the site is simple, regulation.gov.ua, please join. And I would like to ask whether Svetlana joined us. No. So I would like to give the floor to our next speaker. I know that Yevgeny also carried out such surveys, such research, and he knows in practice what it is. So I look at this rating, and I would like to say that I'm not surprised by the results. My organization, the Center of Policy and Legal Reform, we cooperate with the Ministry of Regional Development and Communal Services, and this ministry carried out meetings and also advised with the expert community about the issues of legal acts, and this ministry is open to cooperation with civil society, with the expert community, and is ready to hear us, to hear different opinions, and to find out public opinion, and to implement recommendations in their practical activities. So it is important that we have the law on state regulatory policy, and at the same time I would like to say that this law is not enough. There are two important draft laws that should be adopted. The first one is draft law on public consultations. Natalia said about this is actively developed, and at the last stage this process, the finalizing of the text, it became less open. I do not know what the final text will be, but there should be envisaged responsibility for the bodies of power for non-adherence to the procedures that are provided. Consultations should be provided, and in the law on regulatory policy it is stated that if the procedures were violated, so this act cannot be adopted. And one more important draft law that is important for business, and it will allow us to solve many problems when the bodies of executive power do not take into account of the interests of business and people. This is the administrative procedure law, and this law was adopted in many countries of the EU. And recently, we do not have efficient cooperation with the Ministry of Justice, because in 2015, working group at this ministry, they worked and on the document as Sigma approved this, but this process then was in delay. they started to introduce negative changes to this draft law, and it was not sent to the parliament. So why this law is so important for Ukraine, for business? First, because this draft law, it introduces such thing as interested parties. Also, these parties should participate in the development of administrative acts, so it envisages the right of a person to be heard. If the body of executive power develops some administrative act that interfere the interests of persons, so these people can provide their position, their view. Also, this draft law envisages the right to know about the materials of the case. Also, the executive body should motivate and say why this act is adopted. If it is negative for some category of people, executive body should provide proofs why it was adopted, and it should have a clear order of appeal. And also it introduces the pre-trial procedures. Also one important aspect of this draft law is that administrative act becomes efficient when it is brought to the those interested parties, and I believe that this draft law should be adopted as it was agreed by the as it was approved by Sigma organization. And this law, there should be also law on public consultations adopted on administrative procedure, and in this way we will reinforce the protection of rights of people and business, and we will decrease the number of violations of the rights for all of us, and we will force bodies of power to take our interests into account when they adopt these acts. Thank you, Evgeny. So you said it correctly, and our office is always for efficient regulation, and any regulation should be made in a correct way. So if you want to comment, please, we will be really glad if you comment on the rating. If not, I give Igor the floor for final remark. I would like to say maybe some thoughts that we had while we were working on this rating. So we didn't understand it from the start. The first problem is the problem in the interaction between the body that form the policy and those that implement the policy. There are many instances when the body that implements the policy, they are ready to work on the regulatory act. They prepare this act, for example, archive service or forest agency, and the ministry, the body that forms the policy, it doesn't do anything. And then some papers go to the ministry and they can stay there for months or even a year. So we should think about this problem and we should resolve it. And there are some opposite cases when the body that forms the policy, they want to resolve the problem. They put the task before the body that should implement the policy, but that body is not able, does not want to implement it. And the ministry also in the dead corner. So the task is clear, but the body that should implement it doesn't do anything or does something else. So another problem that appeared is that according to the law, the government forms the policy on all the spheres in Ukraine. And in practice, we have many areas where none of the body forms the policy. One of the issues I didn't find the answer to who forms the policy in the heat energy sector. So this is the area that got lost. So there are many policies like this, tens of them, and also the policy can be formed by several bodies. And one act is prepared for several bodies. So we should think about it. And also at sub-law level, we cannot solve this problem. We should maybe make some systemic changes to the law in order that the government formed the policy through the ministries, and from the other side, we should remove the issue when two ministries deal with one issue that they cannot divide it properly. So this is the general opinion. One more problem that appeared. Everyone asks about the ministries. They do not communicate the development of the acts, but there is a necessity to prepare some regulatory document, and it is not prepared, or it is prepared with delay. For example, one problem with connection, but we have the law newly adopted about electricity, and in order that it worked, we should adopt tons of regulatory acts, and the government now is in delay. So they are in delay. And from one side, the society thinks that government is responsible, but from the other side, government cannot do anything because there is a regulator that is independent. And the same problem with wastes. Each day we hear about it, and everyone asks the government and the ministry. But this is the issue of regulator, and regulator is on holidays.
I would like to add a few words. There is a problem in this that field, but we proceed from the constitution that every body of government works according to the constitution, and in our ministry we have drafting department, and the cabinet of ministers controls, while the licensing body is in charge of many issues which concerns its own activity. Anyway, we will face the problem that the regulator is established on the European standards, which bans such tracing of own activities by the same body, and politically the containment of social factors, regulator does not care about the tariffs. This approach is global at the level of ministry. This is the matter of policy. Verkhovna Rada and cabinet, they should delineate what policies they are in charge, so to divide the competencies, and why there are problems, why you regulate what is not specified as your competence. So relevant policy making bodies and policy implementing bodies, they should be strictly defined. Maybe somewhere regulators, they have too many functions. So simplification is on the way as concerns ministries. And for example, there is communication between centers of this is not correct when the centers solves and ministries, their communication is not defined clearly. Ministries and solves the cabinet of ministers should pay attention to the problems in their communication as concerns gaps or dubbing in of powers. There is some work on this issue, some laws on some simplification. The work on simplification is on the way. Thank you, Mr. Maxim. We will finalize our event. Thank you for investing your time and being present here. Not every agency delegated representatives to our event. Thank you to Ms. Kateryna for investing your time and voicing out the position of businesses, and Ms. Natalia, we would like to thank you, and we are glad that you are continuing improvements, and thank you colleagues for coming. Maybe you will be further active to work, and we are ready to cooperate with every one of you. And I'd like to say that Igor, as an analyst, is a developer of this rating. We have Anton Maleev here in the room. You can take his contact details and contact him. He is always open to constructive dialogue and cooperation. Thank you.